Kicking off the list at number 10, Madame de Pompadour. One of the most powerful women in the 18th century France, Madame de Pompadour is known mainly as the mistress of King Louis XV of France. The last ever portrait of her shows us a respectable, middle-aged woman piercing through your skull. Or your soul. I don't know why I said skull, it's pretty intense, but we'll keep it. Right through your skull, apparently. Since her birth in 1721, she was well educated, and quickly she became a member of the French court. She is remembered mainly as the official chief mistress of King Louis XV from 1745 to 1751. But in 1756, she was officially named the 13th Lady in Waiting. That's a pretty big deal. Over her lifetime, she became the political advisor to the king, which many historians aren't too fond of. But to be fair, she put in the work to get his attention. She would show up to his place in a carriage at night. She would put on plays, like actual productions where she was the lead. I don't know why I did Peter Pan, but hey, that's how I do it. She would perform plays about nymphs and the gods, so if that doesn't deserve a super like, I'm not really sure what does.
Number 9, Veronica Franco. Born of a merchantman and his wife, a courtesan, Veronica was destined for a movie-worthy life. Franco lived in the 1500s and her father ensured that she was equipped with a strong education. She quickly found a love for reading and writing, her poetry becoming part of her legacy later on. Sadly though, her beloved father died very suddenly, leaving her family close to ruin, and so her mother stepped in to give her a different sort of education. She was an excellent student, and though she married a much older doctor when she was just 16 years old, she was later unfaithful with a merchant, dissolving the marriage entirely. She then became known as an honest courtesan, meaning she was highly educated and could fraternize with important and dignified personnel of the time. She had a short affair with King Henry III of France. She also continued her writing pursuits and was even accepted in one of the most well-known literary circles in Venice, and 2 of her volumes were published. This is in the 1500s, keep in mind, that's incredibly rare. As a sexually free and intellectual woman, she would have made quite the stir. Sadly, she died penniless at 45 after she lost all of her wealth in the plague, but she is forever immortalized for her poetry and her philanthropy in helping old and destitute courtesans. Prior to the plague, she planned to build a safe house for them.
Number 8, Mata Hari. Birth name Margaretha Zell, this scandalous figure in history was an exotic dancer with a tragic past turned super spy. At age 27, Mata moved to Paris and reinvented herself as an artiste. As most do at that age and that time of their life, she tapped into her Dutch roots and started to perform these dance acts under the alias Lady Grecia MacLeod. She was the first dancer, check this out, the first dancer to go fully nude. Her shows of course got busy, people were into this newfound idea, she was the talk of the town, many towns for that matter, and eventually she got so good she started to tour. Yeah, like Green Day, she would tour all around. For years she would travel around Europe and perform these sold out crowds, but the most intriguing part was her clientele. These military officers and aristocrats would give her gifts after these shows. They wanted to hang out of course. They were in love after a performance like that. Mata was on board, she loved this, especially coming from a tragic, horrible marriage previously. This was the life that she needed. So around 1914 her dancing days were starting to decline, those patellas were starting to catch up to her, plus the war also broke out and things changed. Hari ended up being sent back to Holland and was later approached by Karl Kromer, German consul in Amsterdam, because the men she was in contact with were considered a valuable asset at this time. So she went from being a dancer to a spy, codename H21. That's so sick. James Bond who?
Number 7, Empress Theodora. Theodora from the brothel, as she's often known as. I don't know why, but here we are. From actress to marrying Emperor Justinian I, Empress Theodora had quite the life. The two ruled together during the golden period of the Byzantine Empire. She was the most powerful woman ever seen in Byzantium. Just like her mother, Theodora was born into the theater and would travel performing acrobatics, dancing and stripping, while also working as a lady of the night, because the two went hand in hand. She was said to have danced a particularly lurid routine with geese. Don't let your imagination run too far with that one. So how did she marry an emperor? Well, there was a tradition in the Byzantine court for emperors to marry beauty contest winners. Entrants could be from any class. But Justinian still had to amend that law that stated he couldn't marry an actress to make it happen. But she was the most beautiful, so you know, do it up. 20 years his junior, Justinian ensured she was crowned as his equal. As they were matched in intelligence, ambition, and energy, the two heralded in a new era for the Byzantine Empire.
Number 6. Cleopatra. Cleopatra had some wild methods herself to get attention, believing she was the goddess Isis. She tried to appear as the goddess as often as she could, so she would do so by preparing these dazzling entrances everywhere she went. She would also look fabulous. She was known as like the most beautiful queen ever for this reason. The most famous entrance she made was in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria. This was an important time in ancient Egypt. There were problems with the family. She was banished at this time, but she still wanted to meet the Roman general Caesar. How do you meet the man nicknamed the bald adulterer without being seen? Well, she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack like a bowling ball and then personally hand-delivered right to Caesar's bedroom. DoorDash. See ya. I'm gonna sneak into concerts by using this method, see if it actually works. So she won the heart of Rome's future dictator. Great, and then eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Quite the play if you ask me. Now her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, and in a following battle he drowned in the Nile, leading to Cleopatra's ultimate return to the throne. All you gotta do is take your clothes off and jump in a sack. See ya.
Number 5 is the Zenday Emperor of China. He is remembered as a notorious leader of the Ming Dynasty for both his wild behavior and his cruelty. His biggest scandal surrounded the poor decision to leave senior eunuch Liu Jin in charge of the state's affairs. This causes unseemly taxes and poverty and unnecessary acts of aggressions, things the general public, tend to hate. The two finally fell out after 2 years and Liu was sentenced to slow slicing, a particularly graphic, drawn-out, torturous death I don't recommend you look into without a strong stomach. Oh, and on top of that, he would waste the resources of his kingdom to play pretend. He would take the faux role of a general and went on raiding parties that were all dressed in silk. He even invented an imaginary best friend / alter ego named Zhu Shu. To the exasperation of the Chinese government, he actually made them address this imaginary friend or watched as he ordered it on pointless raiding missions. Ironically, it's rumored sometimes he'd even put on a wig to represent his own alter ego and have the courts address him as Zhu Shu. Eventually, Zenday the emperor unexpectedly dies at the age of 29 shortly after he drunkenly fell off of a boat and contracted some fatal disease in the Yellow River. Number 4, we can't talk scandal without Caligula. The emperor of Rome, he was born in 12 AD and lived to 41 AD. Caligula spent his time on the throne building lavish projects, exercising his sadism and brutality, and exhibiting eccentric behavior at any chance. Also cheating. So much cheating on his wife. Well, wives. 4 wives. Caligula sucked at settling down, and his proclivity for both genders apparently made it no easier. He was known to seduce senators' wives right in front of them, bring home working girls, and engage in affairs with theater acts, specifically a dude named Menster. He also happened to love banging his sister. These did not win him public favor. Caligula is said to have banned the mention of goats in his presence due to his hairy appearance, and also practiced facial contortions to make himself be terrifying to his subjects. He was obsessed with his horse, building an entire castle and attempting to appoint the steed to the high office of consul, and he once even had his army construct a 2-mile floating bridge just so it could gallop along it. After 5 years of this, his own army kills him. His unforgivable mistake was to jeopardize Rome's military reputation by declaring a sort of surreal war on the sea, ordering his soldiers to wade in, slash at the waves with their swords and spears, and carry chests full of seashells away as spoils of a victory over the god Neptune. Number 3 is Emperor Zhejiang of China. He's actually the cousin of the previously mentioned Zenday Emperor, a family that scandals together stays together. And man, did this guy have some ideas. From dabbling in Taoism, he became obsessed with the legendary elixir of immortality and believed that collecting the menstrual blood of female virgins and using it to make a substance called red lead would give him powers that would enable him to live forever. Over 20 of these poor concubines were held directly for this purpose, as well as for his exploitations. They were only fed mulberry leaves and rainwater to keep them pure and faced harsh living situations. In 1542, 16 of these concubines emotionally broke and planned a coup. They were seconds from success had one of the conspirators not panicked and backed out, running to snitch to the empress. The emperor was unconscious for over 24 hours, and so the empress decided to deal out the punishments on her own and gave the 16 girls the terrible death sentence of slow slicing. Also, their family members beheaded and others taken into forced servitude. One of the concubines she'd sentenced, however, was the emperor's favorite, so when a fire broke out a couple years later in their temple, he actually let his wife perish in order she not be saved. Apparently, she'd always been too old for his perverted taste. The emperor died in 1567 1967 at the age of 59. It's been widely speculated he succumbed to the toxic mercury contained in the elixirs of immortality that he had been ingesting over his lifetime. Number 2 is Charles III. He ruled from the time he was 12 in 1380 to his death in 1422, whilst under the 100-Year War of England was at its peak. Naturally, this is a horrible time to have someone dubbed Charles the Mad on the throne. In 1392, he shows his first red flags of instability when he suddenly turns on his own knights during a manhunt and starts attacking his own advisor. It took several knights to subdue him and carry him back to the castle. It's all downhill from there. While they had assumed it was stress that caused that outburst, in the following years, it would prove otherwise. He began to forget people's names and roles, including his own. He would forget where he was, even like he was king. Maybe this was because he spent so much time running around the castle on all fours pretending to be a wolf and howling at people. By the time Charles was convinced he was made of glass and banned people from touching him lest he break, well, his family had written him off. But now there were multiple sides vying for that throne. So during the 100-Year War, civil war breaks out in the French monarchy between Charles's brother and cousin. This allowed England and other countries an immense upper hand in invasions, and so by the time Charles dies, much of France was occupied by foreign powers. And number 1 is Emperor Rudolph II. This guy was a known disaster. He was elected as the Holy Roman Empire in 1576 when he was already experiencing deep depression and mania. He also immediately tore up the religious settlement that for the past 20 years had kept Germany's Catholics and Protestants away from each other. Ending all peace, he embarked on a crusade to eradicate Protestantism from Germany's towns and villages, restarting an unnecessary war that had already been finished. Protestants' response was fast and strong, a self-defense league, alongside Hungarians rising in revolt and Turkish also taking an offensive. Rudolph ran his up to Prague Castle and hid, refusing to speak to anyone. This scandal has the Habsburgs replace Rudolph with his brother Matthias, who undoes all the damage by restoring religious peace to Germany and signing treaties with the Turkish and Hungarians. Rudolph has a tantrum over this and starts the Turkish War again. So the Bohemians appealed to Matthias again for help, and in 1611 Rudolph was forced to hand power over to his brother once and for all. He died a year later, only after laying the foundation for the disastrous 30 years of war that would tear Europe apart within 6 years of his death. We're gonna start with a classic, the Death House Landlady. Social workers in the 1970s looked up upon Dorothea Puente and her boarding house with admiration. Puente had a reputation for taking in people considered tough cases, recovering alcoholics, addicts, the mentally ill, the elderly. And she was so sweet looking too. Aw, look at the little cardigans, cute cottage house. Well, psych, you guys. Puente spent her youth being a huge piece of human garbage, abandoning any children she had, eating out of jail, others, so naturally she opens a boarding home, which she loses spectacularly fast after getting caught signing her own name on her tenants' benefit checks. In the 1980s, she worked as a personal caretaker who drugged her clients and stole their valuables very Cardi B style, so she got sent to prison. Then she said round 2 and opened another boarding house. This would be the Death House. For years, the disappearances went unnoticed, even by their probation officers. Puente's cute old lady gimmick and some wicked scone recipes was her meal ticket to getting away, but eventually, like all killers, the wrong person goes missing eventually. While a tenant at first backed up Puente's usual lie that the person had left on vacation, he slips a note to the police before they left saying it was untrue. So they asked permission to do a little landscaping, dig up the yard. Puente's all like, yeah, of course, why not? Here, even take this extra shovel, get to digging. Then she asked if she would be okay to go buy a coffee. They said yes, because she's an 1,000-year-old lady. What could she possibly do? She dipped, they find 7 bodies, and Puente finds herself a sunny vacation in Los Angeles on the lam for 5 days when police catch her before she can Mary Poppins herself away again. She received multiple life sentences. I love a sustainable gift, but this? Thrifting and gifting done wrong. It's 1861 and Mary Pichon is looking for work that doesn't require her having womanly assets. Luckily, she meets a kind man whose intentions seem genuinely good, hearty work for her, and so she lets him lead her into the woods. Oh, you see where horror movies get their inspiration. People really go, okay, and then prance on after inevitable danger, and it's danger Mary meets once the guy attacks her. Mary, who somehow manages to escape, runs for her life as he chases her through the woods all the way to a nearby village, and she tells authorities, who promptly go find him. When they find him, they find 2 bodies and piles of female clothing inside of his property, bloodstained and torn, which didn't bother Miss Drummelard at all, who's just been out here wearing this clothing. And yes, homegirl knew her husband was ripping them off of the women he was killing. The clothes, by the way, implied hundreds of women had died on their property. Drummelard was found guilty of 6 murders and they chopped his head off in 1862, which by the way is a way better fate than his daddy, who was part of the plot to kill the King of Austria and got ripped apart by ponies. His wife meanwhile got 20 years for running around in dead people clothes. Let's meet a crazy nun who put back on everything. 15th century Milan. This is where Marianne De La Vega Marino was born to a wealthy banker who dumped her on her aunt and took off. He remembered she existed at 13, long enough to force her into a convent in Monza. Now a nun, she did pretty aight. She was a role model, did stuff diligent-y, very Jesus-y. I don't know what nuns do. I do know that in her 20s she fell for an aristocratic womanizer, which is hella out of character for a nun. Gianosio and Marianne were sinning it up all over the place. He had a blacksmith make keys to the convent to sneak in, and they even had secret kids, but Marianne alternated between gratifying her lust or just guilt tripping over that sin. So in her brain, to try and make herself hate him, she started eating his feces. It did not work. His feces hit the fan when a nun threatens to whistleblow the affair, so Osseo smokes her. Then, to cover their tracks, since rumors started about a missing nun, they decide to kill more people. Osseo kills the blacksmith while Marianne deals with an apothecary that supplied her some anti-baby herbs once. Yeah, it didn't work. Governor Milan sits everyone down in a torture chamber and says, let's talk this out. Osseo manages to sneak away and he's sentenced to execution absentia. Marianne, meanwhile, gets bricked up in solitary confinement for 15 years until she's a hollow empty shell and they let her out to live out in a convent. The end. Fairy tale romance. She's known by many names, but I will introduce her as the Bloody B word. And the most prolific serial killer of the Western world, Elizabeth Bathory was niece to Stephen Bathory, head of the eminent Hungarian family and Prince of Transylvania, who later even became the King of Poland in 1575. She was married to Count Nastasy and they lived at Karasin Castle in the Carpathian Mountains, now Slovakia, in the 1600s. Okay, what else? Oh yeah, she practiced vampirism because this is Transylvania and everything's a joke, I guess. She is alleged to have killed more than 650 women with the help of 4 servants, specifically those with qualities such as great beauty, intelligence, strength, etc., in order to drink their blood and bathe in it. Her reasoning for this was to preserve her youth and beauty. Word was beginning to spread about her sadistic activities. At first, victims were servants in her castle, then they were daughters of local peasants, and later they included girls sent to her by local gentry families wanting them to learn good manners from a deranged Twilight fan. When her murderous career was discovered, the Countess was walled up in her castle from 1610 until her death in 1614. She's also the inspiration for the famous sapphic female Dracula counterpart, Carmilla. Before I go crazy, tell me I'm pretty. So, from 1971 to 72, police officers were having a bit of an issue. Super weird, creepy graveyard crimes. Someone had been exhuming corpses from their graves and interfering with them, which we all know is code for they are a perv. They had 5 bodies on their hands that had been tampered with, even chewed on a little, and some showed signs of adult activities having transpired. Then on the flip side, May 6, 1972, a young couple is found killed in their car. That crime's different. Why connect them? The female body showed evidence that the killer had been trying to drink her blood like a big gulp and had done more gross stuff. Later, the same thing happens to a lone woman with the same posthumous rituals. Then a mortuary worker is just trying to do his literal job and walks in on someone locking lips with a cold cadaver, who proceeds to freak out on being caught. Not great, since he had a weapon. Mortuary worker survives his wound and eventually identifies Kuno Hoffman as his attacker. Hoffman confesses to everything, no hesitation, the graveyard creeping and the killings. His motivations had to be explained through a translator. Kuno had undergone extreme treatment as a child and was now mute and deaf. After a previous prison sentence, he turned to the occult for solace. Studied from Satan books and got in his head if he did some weird stuff to corpses, he could become handsome and popular finally, that people would like him. Kuno Hoffman was confined to an asylum for life, and while his backstory is not an excuse for his actions, it is an explanation. So a reminder that sometimes treating others with kindness can make all the difference in the world.
Number 5. Pablo Escobar. Imagine being born in a poor country, one of the poorest, and after a few short years being the richest man on the planet. At least cash-wise. Pablo Escobar was a smuggler from Colombia and during the 1980s rose to absolute fame and infamy. Starting out as smuggling your standard illicit cargo like valuable electronics, goods, and upgrading to whatever Macho Man Randy Savage was on during the entirety of his career. You know what I'm talking about. Oh yeah! I need someone to know Sugar Hulkamania, brother! Strangely enough, with all his wealth, he tried to take his claim and run for office in Colombia, which didn't work out because they knew who he was. He can give his money out to the people all he wants, but the dude had quite the rap sheet. Probably one of the biggest. Number 4. Al Capone. Al Capone is the textbook definition of corrupt, and sure, he isn't the leader in the normal sense, but a lot of people looked up to him. However, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about all the people he made corrupt. Cops, lawyers, and even judges. There was a lot, it's kind of alarming actually. All were warming up to him and old Scarface because their pockets were deep, and if you didn't take the money, well, you could end up getting hurt pretty bad actually. Capone may be gone, but Chicago to this day remains one of the most corrupt cities in America. That was actually ranked number 1 corrupt city in America 3 times in a row. That's crazy. Illinois being the 3rd most corrupt state, so there you go. Number 3. Frank Rosenthal. Okay, back to Las Vegas and the casinos. Frank Rosenthal. He was an American sports betting genius and perhaps maybe had connections to the Las Vegas mob. But I ain't saying nothing. Well, Rosenthal was such a good earner, as I've been told, that he was put in charge of his very own casino. Now, anyone who's ever worked in the casino industry or lottery will tell you that the rules are very strict. There's no fooling around with state law. The counting room, for example, only gives access to certain people. Not even the owner sometimes can go in. Well, under Rosenthal, sometimes a few $100,000 would go missing from time to time in a skim operation. Casino managers are supposed to be squeaky clean. Rosenthal was anything but. Number 2. Joseph Stalin. Today, most young people know the Gulag as the place you go when you really suck at Call of Duty Warzone. And let me tell you, I spent my fair share in there, brother. I spent my fair share in there, brother. However, for people living under Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, this was not a fun FPS to play with friends. Gulags were awful, wretched Soviet prisons where all the peoples he deemed a threat to greater communism were sent to most likely work themselves into their graves, and they did. Millions of people suffered under his reign, and he's remembered only for his brutality and history's second best mustache. It's a pretty good one. It's more like Mario's, but anyway. Number 1. Angry German boy. Angry German guy. German, you know what I'm talking about. You all know him, you all should hate him, really you should. It's the failed art student turned totalitarian autocrat. Mustache Man thought he was bringing home a better Germany, but he was actually dooming it. After his time spent in the First World War, he was tasked by the government to spy on some other groups who were suspected of being evil communists. Wasn't a lot of love for them back then. He ended up finding the National Socialist Party, where he quickly rose to be their leader. And then some brown shirts were made, and then some glass was broken, and then some good folks got hurt, and then your grandpa got, just a big mess, big mess.
Starting off this list at our number 10 spot, we have Ivan IV, more commonly known as Ivan the Terrible. He was the son of Vasily III, who was the Rurik ruler of the Grand Duchy of Moscow. After his father's death, however, at just 3 years old, Ivan was named the Grand Prince, and by the time he was 16, he was declared as the Tsar or Emperor of Russia, officially establishing the Tsardom of Russia. Ivan and his reign are certainly known for the transformation of Russia from a medieval state to an empire, but not without a huge cost to the people of Russia, as well as a hit to the long-term economy. Ivan has been described as being intelligent and devout, but also prone to paranoia, rage, and episodic outbreaks of mental instability that only increased the older he got. One of the main points of extreme violence and viciousness was the massacre of Novgorod, which saw the deaths of an estimated 2,000 to 15,000 people, as well as a shocking amount of acts of extreme, violent cruelty. In the later years, like I mentioned, his violent tendencies only got worse, which led to him doing things like striking his heir in the heat of an argument so badly that it left him with brain damage. In the end, Ivan the Terrible met his demise from a heart attack in 1584. Yeah, they say that impaling hundreds of people every day isn't great for the heart health. Someone should have let him know about vitamins and minerals, or maybe some good cardio-heavy exercise. I don't know. In our number 9 spot today, we have Leopold II. As the second king of the Belgians, Leopold has been said to be responsible for the deaths of somewhere between 2 to 15 million people. Yeah, million. It wasn't in Belgium that he committed his atrocious acts, however. It all started when he claimed himself to be the founder and sole owner of the Congo Free State, which was a private project he undertook on his own. Leopold loved colonialism. He wanted to colonize everything he possibly could, and this is why he started the International African Society, which he used to travel to Africa, claim land that obviously wasn't his, and we're not talking about a small piece, we're talking about land that is several times the size of Belgium, and many countries just let him do this and allowed him to freely rule this land. This is definitely already bad enough, but of course things only got worse. Leopold had his own private militia that he used to force the indigenous population into hard labor. While Leopold was doing this, of course, for economic reasons, he also was just doing this because he was a messed up guy. He was terrible. He made those who lived here harvest and process rubber, and the punishments for those who didn't harvest enough for him were extremely severe. Not to mention, it is also said that sometimes he would just inflict harm because he could. Eventually, a stop needed to be put to his wrongdoings, but of course he was going to do everything he could to hide some of the horrors he did. The entire archive of the Congo Free State was burned, and he told his aide that even though the Congo had been taken from him, quote, "they have no right to know what I did there." The Congo was taken from him but remained under the rule of Belgium in 1908 until the Congo was given independence in 1960. As for Leopold, well, he remained the ruler of Belgium until his death in 1909, but the secret was out now and no one liked him. In fact, his funeral procession was booed by the crowd because everyone was angry at him for the things that he had done. In our number 8 spot today we have Qin Shi Huang. While this leader is often credited with creating the first unified Chinese empire, the Qin Dynasty, these accomplishments didn't come cheap. When he came to power in 221 BCE, he strictly followed 7 principles which not only pushed for severe punishment, but also acted in contraries and issued unattainable orders. He also is said to have been extremely paranoid about the power of the educated, which led to him burning books so that no one could ever learn what was in them, and he also killed 460 Confucian scholars in just 1 year, which some claim was because they were unable to make him immortal. Huang wanted not only to establish a transport system, but also build a wall to keep out enemies, and this meant that he had to relocate at least 120,000 families. He declared that all would be equal under one law, and then taxed everyone heavily, and because of these heavy taxes as well as the insane labor that was expected to create the wall and the transport system, thousands of people were overworked, starved, and perished. He also had laborers create a massive tomb for him, complete with 8,000 life-size terracotta warriors and horses, which you may be familiar with because now it is rumored to be an extremely haunted place. I mean, an evil ruler's resting place? Yeah, of course it's haunted. In our number 7 spot today we have Don Carlos. I'll be honest, this little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kind of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias during the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to the inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals just for fun. I mean, nowadays we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then they just chalked it up to boys being boys. It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Red flags, they were abundant. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to whip a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made the prince that he didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided there's no way in hell. Like, he was so bad, she would rather marry his dad, which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later. In our number 6 spot today we have King Charles VI. King Charles VI started off his reign by being very well loved and respected, but as time went on over his 4 decades of ruling, he ended up being known as Charles the Mad. His erratic behavior had him hacking up knights, imagining that he was St. George, and he would also have bouts of amnesia where he would be able to recognize some people but not his wife and children. This is all very strange and of course quite sad, as he was obviously exhibiting signs of extreme mental illness, but one of the strangest symptoms was him believing that he was made of glass. He was terribly frightened of falling or being jostled too hard, and he would actually insert iron rods into his clothing to try and keep himself from shattering. But then he would also apparently run wild at top
speeds throughout the halls of the castle or the streets, which would obviously mean that he was totally abandoning his sphere of fragility. It apparently got so bad that he had to be held inside with the entrances bricked up. Sadly, he continued on this path until he passed away in 1422.
Because old is in the name, Oldenburg Dynasty, which began in ancient times, so they should probably rename it to Ancientburg. Apparently this lineage comes from the god Odin, according to myth, then more realistically the king of Jutes, and then the Saxons down to Wittgenstein, and the last king of the Saxons in 800 AD. After that, the house gets its name through Wittgenstein's eventual descendant Elimar I, Count of Oldenburg, who lived in the 12th century. His descendants reign over present-day Denmark and Norway, and until the 1970s they also ruled Greece. Prince Philip of Great Britain, the son of Prince Andrew of Greece, was a member of the House of Oldenburg, and this dynasty now rules the UK and its Commonwealth realms too, under his son Prince Charles and any of his heirs and successors. They're back for more. This time it's the Chinese dynasty, the Tangs. The Tang Dynasty of China represents something of a golden age in the Imperial Chinese history, characterized by proliferation of the art, economic development, and territorial expansion into Central Asia. It's remembered as one of the most prosperous and culturally influential eras in Chinese history. The Tang Dynasty's capital of Chiang was one of the largest empires in world history, controlling from Eurasia to Korea in the east to Afghanistan in the west. The Tang encourage any and all people with talent, whatever their background and ethnicity, to come to Chiang and participate as working citizens. In the 7th century, the Tang Dynasty introduced the Tang Code, a revised penal system governing China's laws and punishments. It was a complex code informed by Confucian principles and rationalism. With it, the Tang court abolished certain forms of cruel corporal punishment, preserving death for only extremes. There were 3 key departments of the civil service along with 6 ministries managing revenue, rights, personnel, defense, justice, and infrastructure. And fun fact, Li Yuan, who started as a commander of the tyrannical Su Empire, turned around to revolt with the help of his daughter. She led an army of 70,000 and captured the cities before joining her father at Chiang, one of the few female generals in history, let alone China's history. The two of them created the Tang Dynasty. This was also the only dynasty to have a female emperor, Wu Zetian, and under her reign the army successfully conquered Central Asia and added much more territory to the empire. A dynasty that ruled the Russian territories for over 700 years, the Ruriks. The Rurik Dynasty gets its name from the Viking chieftain named Rurik, who in 862 AD founded the town Novgorod, one day to be Kievan Rus. Rurik was succeeded by his young son Igor, who was too young to rule, so Rurik's kinsman Oleg ruled until Igor came of age. Igor ruled a short while before being killed, but at his young age he'd already produced an heir, Sviatoslav. Svia waged war for most of his rule. After his early death, his 3 sons duke it out with each other, and one survives to be king, Vladimir the Great, who consolidated the state of Kievan Rus to include modern-day Baltic Sea region, including Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. Vladimir's son, Yaroslav the Wise, brought the state to its zenith in culture and military importance and laid the foundation for the crucial code of law for the state. However, after his death, the Rurik dynasty split into 3 princely cadet branches, the heads of each styling themselves as grand princes. From that point on, Kievan Rus was essentially a loosely formed state, and the Rurik dynasty broke up into sub-dynasties, each one ruling a distinct principality, claiming to the descent of Rurik the Old. And just as it often happens with large and successful ruling dynasties, the line of Rurik becomes hazy and muddled after a while. With the formation of principles and sub-branches, the family tree of the Ruriks grew complex and vast. Nevertheless, the Rurik dynasty would remain in power until 1610 AD, boasting a total of 21 male line generations. We can't talk about the most powerful dynasties without bringing up the longest one, the Imperial House of Japan. According to historical chronicles in ancient Japan, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, the sun goddess Amaterasu Omikami presented imperial regalia to her grandson Nagini no Mikoto. He in return passed them on to his descendants, the emperors, the first of whom was Emperor Jimmu in 660 BC. After Emperor Jimmu, there was a succession of sons that inherited the title from their fathers, but very little is known about most of them until Emperor Sujin, who was on the throne from 97 BC to 30 BC. And this emperor was the first to have more serious administration of the country by having a census and improving tax systems. Some emperors that came after him didn't have any children, like the 22nd emperor. In this case, the emperor would name sons or grandsons of brothers or uncles as heirs, so the lineage would continue. The emperor was thought to possess magical powers, therefore considered beneath him to be involved in the day-to-day running of the country. This was left to the ministers and advisors until Emperor Tenji, then followed by Prince Shotoku of the Nara period
period, creating the first constitution. From the moment Japan became more organized in the 6th century, the imperial family and court have played important roles in Japanese politics. A period of unrest started with the law of the sword above anything else, and this violent period only ended in the Tokugawa clan establishing a new shogunate in the Edo in the early 17th century. As the name implies, the Meiji Restoration was a time during which the emperor was restored to his former glory. Japan started branching out quickly to catch up with the West and protect its interests in the region, and it's modernized its industries. And ending us off today is the Medici Dynasty. Famously the wealthiest family of Europe, they controlled Florence and made it prosper, funding its arts and development. They were bankers by trades, benevolent despots by design, and cultural influencers. The family produced 3 popes, 2 queens, and many Florentine rulers, ruling from the 13th into the 17th century. The Medici family commissioned virtually all of Florence's breathtaking art and architecture. Works by Brunelleschi, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Donatello, Fra Angelico. Giovanni de Medici is the first Medici, a rags to riches type working his ass off and also marrying above his social class, so he used that dowry given to make a risky investment in textiles. Pays off, and so he started the Medici Bank. By 1420 he's the wealthiest man in Florence, using it to kick off Florence's prominence in the arts during the early Renaissance period. His firstborn son Cosimo ruled Florence from his workshop behind the scenes, passing a yay or a nay on proposed government laws from his study. Over 37 years, Cosimo created a dynasty that would endure centuries and produced 4 popes, one of them his own kids. The last Medici, Anna Maria de Luisa de Medici, died in 1743. The Medici line was then extinct, but the legacy of the family lived on. Anna bequeathed the Medici treasures, the family's entire artistic patrimony, to the people of Florence. The only condition is that none of it can be sold or gifted to other countries. Thank God, because we know the Museum of Stolen Items, oh my bad, I mean the Royal British Museum, would have taken those in a second.
And at number 10 is Ludwig II. Ludwig operated as the King of Bavaria from 1845 to 1886. He was an opera fan, builder of dream palaces, spendthrift, deposed monarch, and likely the victim of a coup. So, Ludwig was an enthusiastic consumer of art, so when he was appointed to the throne at just 18, he exploits his status for entertainment. He funds his hero, the composer Richard Wagner, on some of the era's most renowned operas. He also built Neuschwanstein? I can't say it properly to save my life, but it's a fairy tale palace on a hilltop. All this lavish expenditure was causing more and more debt in the empire, and so higher taxes. It caused in 1886 conspirators to file a false medical document declaring Ludwig insane and unfit to rule. He may have spent an insane amount of money, but he himself wasn't. So, irregardless, that next morning, Ludwig and his personal physician are found floating dead in a Bavarian lake with no indication as to what had happened to him. One of Ludwig's most famous statements had been, "I wish to remain an eternal enigma to myself and others." Well, goal achieved. Number 9 is Henry V. Can't talk crazy without bringing up this guy. He's famous for his rinse and repeat style of having wives. As you may know, first he gets a wife, then he gets tired of her and is annoyed she can't have his male heir, so he obtains a side piece. So now you get rid of the initial wife, usually through and then marry the side piece. Repeat. He did this numerous times. Henry also slept with just about anyone he could find, including his second wife's sister, and he may have fathered 2 of her kids. Ugh. And Henry is recorded to have a minimum of 12 mistresses outside his 6 wives, but there is potential for more. When Henry takes up wife number 1's lady-in-waiting, Anne Boleyn, he had actually subverted the entire religion that they were a part of in order to divorce his initial wife Catherine and marry this mistress, effectively establishing a new church in which he became the head and changing the course of history. The huge scandal came not so much from that, but because in 1536 Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, one of her own brother, and plotting the king's assassination, which was a sensational news story at the time. Number 8 is the Christian IV of Denmark. Even when he first took the throne in 1766, people were already convinced he was crazy. This brat threw food at dinner guests and picked fights, but rich people can be real jerks, so it wasn't until at some point when Christian discovered a newfound interest in his that he became an official write-off. This guy became so obsessed with the flicking of the wrist that it interrupted his royal duties. In fact, his court confronted him with the concern that it was affecting his health and could potentially make him infertile or insane, in an 18th century version of "stop that or you'll go blind." Thankfully, he didn't do it in front of visiting dignitaries at first. Instead, he just did other weird stuff, like leapfrog to them or slap them without warning or push them over. He'd randomly yelp or holler in the middle of a conversation. Eventually, the court's concern grew true, and Christian was so nuts that his personal physician managed to talk him into handing over the control of executive decision making to himself, also while banging Christian's wife in the background. Christian wanted to keep that appendage to himself, so I guess somebody else had to do the job for him. Or both of them, I guess. Number 7 is a mouthful. Nazar II. One of the greatest Babylonian kings, who I'll be calling Neb for my own sake, won battles against Egypt and Assyrians in his quest to make Babylonia the most powerful city-state. He gained control of trade in Mesopotamia from Syrian and Palestinians. He was powerful and tactical, and for 7 years he wandered open fields convinced he was an ox. This tale of insanity is documented in the Bible. According to Daniel 4:25, Neb had a disturbing dream in which his interpreter told him it meant, "You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched in the dew of the heavens." This prophecy fulfilled itself 12 months later when Neb fled from civilization suddenly. It's quoted he began eating grass like an ox. He became wet from dew. His hair grew long like feathers of an eagle and his nails grew long like claws of a bird. Then at the end of that time, which was 7 years as mentioned, he says, "I am I'm Neb. I looked up toward the heaven and I was right in my mind again." Ironically, there's actually a medical term for this. Boananthropy is a psychological disorder where a sufferer believes they are a cow or ox, so I guess this happened enough times for a term. Number 6 is a wacky dude, Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire. Ibrahim's scandals are more ridiculous than empire crumbling. He was known for a deep, passionate love of plus-size women. Not in a I like them thick kind of way, but Ibrahim's juices started flowing for obese women. So this sultan had his agents track down the largest woman in the entire Ottoman Empire, said to have weighed about 280 to 300 pounds. The sultan was so delighted by her he gave her a high government salary and the title of governor of Damascus. Also the cute nickname Sekepere, which translated means a piece of sugar. Ibrahim wasn't even fully right in his mind before taking the throne. In the Ottoman Empire, it was normal for sultans to slaughter their entire family to ensure there are no corruption or attempts for the throne. Ibrahim's older brother actually let him live because he seemed so mentally ill, even as a prepubescent, to ever even be a threat to the throne. Which, by the way, Ibrahim only ever got because his brother died prematurely without heirs. So after drowning 280 concubines for having another man touch them and feeding tons of gold coins to fish in his palace pool and some other weird stuff, his reign was cut short when a coup led by the Ottomans' highest religious leader, as well as his 6-year-old son, had him strangled. Girl boss alert, let's talk about Miss Calamity Jane. Now that is a cool alias, and a definite upgrade from her original name of Martha Jane Canary, born in Missouri around 1856. By the time she's a teen, Jane's sharpshooting was the talk of the town, and she was the head of her orphaned household. Said to be a whiskey-drinking, gun-tootin' type of gal, she once even spat tobacco at the main actress of a play who is said to have done a terrible role. Jane worked hard and fought harder. She earned her nickname Calamity Jane when she rescued an army captain from his camp being attacked by indigenous clans. She's reported to have saved the lives of 6 stagecoach passengers in 1876 when they were attacked by bandits, and she even nursed people back to health during the Deadwood smallpox outbreak, while cussing them out, of course. Having the reputation for being able to handle a horse better than most men and shoot like a cowboy, her skills took her into Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in 1895, where she performed sharpshooting astride her horse. Jane's struggle with alcoholism lost her this job, and then her following won at a newspaper. Finally, Jane returns to Deadwood, where she was recovering and tired. She works in a caring for the girls, doing their laundry and cooking until she passes. Though she married a man named Burke at the age 33, when Jane died in 1903, she asked to be buried next to Wild Bill Hickok. Rumor has it that Hickok was the only man she ever loved, and her wish was granted. The funeral was the largest ever held in Deadwood for a woman, and Calamity's coffin was closed by a man who, as a boy, she had nursed back to health when the smallpox epidemic took so many lives in Deadwood. His 2 passions in life were his mama and hardcore crime, Thomas Hodges and the Tom Bell Gang. He even started off as a doctor, all the makings of what your mama would want for you. Well, with the exception of crime, but hey, it pays money, so you know. Thomas started as a medical orderly in the Mexican War. He moved to Nashville to start his practice afterwards. Doctor life got boring, and when the gold rush was tempting, he set off to California, where he failed tremendously at prospecting, so just to become a thief, I guess, under the alias Tom Bell. He has an arrest in 1855, but escapes because I guess jails were unlocked buildings or something back then. He escaped escapes with notorious criminal named Bill Gristy, a known thief and arsonist, and a few others. With their help, Hodges formed the Tom Bell Gang and began to prey regularly upon the gold rush area. Their fumble was killing a woman in an unsuccessful robbery attempt, and the gang was tenaciously pursued through the 1856 until Gristy was captured and spilled the beans. Before that, there were violent escapes from the clutches of justice, but because Grizzly's information, Hodges was finally captured by a posse near the Merced River. He wrote letters to his mother and Elizabeth Hood, his mistress and partner in crime, before his execution in 1856. Let's channel some Bonnie and Clyde energy by talking about Jim Reed. Good old Jim was born 8 miles from the Missouri hamlet to a relatively wealthy family. At 17, he moved to Carthage, where he had his first encounter with Myra Bell Shirley. The youths courted, but she was a few years younger, and her father disapproved because of it, leading Reed to quite literally have a gun duel with Myra's father. Reed is forced to leave and takes advantage of the newly started Civil War to join a guerrilla raiders group, where he got a taste for lawless and reckless abandon after a life of spoils. After the war, he continues his reckless abandon. He killed 2 men in Missouri and fled to Dallas, and once again ran into Myra, whose family had moved there after he had, well, killed her dad. They became lovers once more, seeing as she already had a daughter from a past man who really cared about what happened to her reputation now. The two take her daughter and move and have another child together. This family of 4 pulls holdups around the state together for a few months before returning to Texas to buy a farm with their murder money. They could have left there, put the crime behind them, but instead Reed, Myra, and 2 other thieves break into the cabin of Creek Indian chief Watt Grayson. He handled the government subsidies for the tribe, and Reed gang tragically tortured the chief until he tells them where they can find the rumored $30,000. For this and a variety of other misdeeds, Reed soon was hotly pressed by the law, and he was forced to leave Myra behind. His bounty grows and grows as he loses control, and within a few months, a close acquaintance kills Reed for the bounty on his head. Let's follow that famous name up with another, Nat Love. He, like Geronimo in the next segment, is an exemplary historical figure that most people either haven't heard of or they don't know much of his story. Born on a plantation in 1854 Tennessee, Nat fought past the difficulties and challenges of obtaining an education while enslaved, and learned how to read and write as a child with the help of his father and literate people around him. Slavery came to a thankful end, but the strings attached meant that, like many others, Nat's parents stayed on the Love plantation and worked as sharecroppers. Teenage Nat worked in the stables and gained a reputation as a gifted horse breaker. He sold his own beloved horse to hit the big city Dodge, Kansas at age 16. Working on ranches as a literal cowboy and cattle driver, he lived an eventful life, having run into cattle rustlers, enduring inclement weather, had his horse shot out from beneath him, and even met the likes of Pat Matterson and Billy the Kid. Honing his skills on the range, he became an expert marksman and cowboy, and chose to test his abilities in the Deadwood Rodeo of 1876. He won the $200 prize money and prevailed in 2 shooting contests as well. It's a successful lassoing in a bronco ride that earned him the nickname Deadwood Dick, which is hard as. But in 1877, he has a unique cultural run-in when a band of Pima natives capture him while he's rounding up stray cattle that happen to wander onto their territories. The Pimas had injured Love when he tried to escape their capture, but instead of ending his life, they chose to nurse him back to health out of respect for his African American heritage and the plight of his people, which they considered completely uninvolved in their battle against the government. Good old Love got better and took off on one of the Pima's fastest horses, traveling over 100 miles bareback right into the arms of Alice Love, whom he chose to marry in 1889 and abandon the cowboy life for good. He died in 1921 at the age of 67 and wrote a memoir in 1907 you can still read today. The name that inspired many Western flicks, whether old or new, is Geronimo. Unfortunately, most adaptions are incredibly offensive and inaccurate, and a lot of people don't actually know anything about the man and what may be the biggest scandal of the West. So let's learn. Born Guayacla, his story begins when Geronimo began inciting countless raids against the US and Mexican armies after his wife and 3 children and mother were by Mexican troops in the mid-1850s. Wild with grief, it's during an Apache tradition of grieving that he hears the voice of an ancestor tell him, "No gun will ever kill you. I will take the bullets from the guns and I will guide your arrows." Well, Geronimo got his nickname for this exact reason. His ancestors' promise that no bullets could harm him appeared to be true, as he continuously escapes law enforcement, Anglo-Americans, and Mexican troops. He's wounded multiple times, but he always recovers. He becomes a newspaper sensation. The more often Geronimo escaped, and the longer he was able to disappear, the more embarrassed the US military and politicians grew by this scandal. After all, an indigenous chief and his clan were single-handedly stopping the entire government from infringing any further on their promised territory, going against everything the government smeared about the indigenous peoples at the time. Geronimo repeatedly evaded capture and life on reservation. In his famous final escape, a full quarter of the US standing army pursued him and his followers and still couldn't make it. When Geronimo was captured on September 4th of 1886, he was the last Native American leader to formally surrender to the US military. He spent the last 23 years of his life as a prisoner of war, paraded by the American government for approved trips to world fairs and Wild West shows like a display. He was even in attendance at President Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration, but Roosevelt refused Geronimo's plea to permit the Chickawawas to return to their native lands in the West. On his deathbed 3 years later, Geronimo reportedly told his nephew he regretted surrendering to the US. "I should have fought until I was the last man alive," he told him. Geronimo was buried at the Apache Indian Prisoners of War Cemetery in Fort Still, Oklahoma, but thankfully had his body returned to rightful land.
Number 10. Richard Nixon. I just want the American people to know that I've never profited off the people. I've earned every cent, and I am not a crook. Anyway, said Richard Nixon, who might quite possibly be a crook. He probably was. Nixon was the 37th President of the United States of America and had a lot on his plate. China, the Soviet Union, the Middle East, that little tiny war that no one's worried about ever called the Vietnam War. A little tiny one, not a big deal at all, totally not. Oh man, with all that, you just might forget to take bribes from the mafia-backed Teamsters and to do the whole Watergate scandal. Ooh. Look, every president has their secrets, and corruption is just part of the plan. After the Watergate scandal on August 9, 1974, Nixon resigned, which was the right thing to do, but if he didn't, well, he was most likely going to be impeached and he most likely was going to be removed from office. It was going to go all the way, so. Number 9. Manuel Noriega. Most Americans will recall a time in the 1980s when Central America was a point of concentration for American agencies. A big juicy piece of American history, and a place that saw it all was Panama. And its de facto leader, Manuel Noriega. Central America had been a target for the US for some time as communism was beginning to spread down in those gorgeous weather countries, which is a no-no, we don't want that. Manuel himself had been an asset to CIA intelligence for years, and during all the spying on the Reds and overthrowing Contra groups, well, it got a little out of hand. However, Manuel wasn't stupid, and during his time working with the CIA, he had amassed a large fortune, especially after it was discovered he was also aiding those, white powder smugglers in their efforts. You know what I'm talking about. This would result in an American invasion in Panama and his duly arrest. Number 8. JFK. For the most part, this man was great. A president that is fondly remembered by a lot of people in the US. However, the man was not without controversy. First off, the Kennedy family wealth has its ties to La Cosa Nostra, as JFK Sr. made his fortune bootlegging in the 20s. Hey, you gotta make your money somehow. Add to this that JFK's vote numbers may or may not have been tampered with, and well, it's bad luck for democracy. Starting the Vietnam War, having an affair with his wife, and well, it's also rumored that he may also have more mob connections. Not so much him being the gangster, but more like along the lines of, hey, we did you a favor kind of thing, don't forget it kind of thing, or somebody could get hurt kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Number 7. Jimmy Hoffa. Have you folks ever been to Las Vegas? Ever wondered how such an amazing city could be built in the desert? A place where there's blackjack and ladies of the evening, as a futuristic robot would say. Honestly, when I go on my first vacation, it's probably gonna be Las Vegas. It's just my kind of town. I love that kind of stuff. So does Chris. We like that. We like buffets and blackjack and yeah, ladies. Nice. Very nice. Well, back in the 1950s, Las Vegas wasn't a town of corporate-owned family casinos and resorts. Back then, it was all mafia. It's just how it goes. Basically, you get a loan from a corrupt Teamsters union, with a VIG of course, fill it with swanky stuff, book the Hollywood elite like Frank Sinatra or my favorite, Don Rickles, and you got yourself a casino and resort. All of this thanks to Jimmy Hoffa, who was the leader of the Teamsters Union, who would loan out Teamster cash to known criminals so they could make their fortune in Las Vegas. Which, in case you didn't know, is fraud and extremely corrupt. And very dishonest, especially for a man that claims to be very honest. it wasn't a good look. It was bad. Number 6, Yuri Geller. Today this name doesn't mean very much, but back in the day it actually meant quite a lot. Yuri Geller is a self-proclaimed psychic who possesses psychic abilities. During his peak fame had convinced people of his psychic powers. Spoiler alert, he doesn't have any. His powers are more along the lines of a birthday party magician. Now, there's nothing wrong with magic or illusions. I actually enjoy them quite a lot. I think it's fun and interesting showmanship. I love magicians, they're cool. However, Yuri doesn't sell it like that, and that's the issue really, is that he's selling it. Telling people that they can have his psychic powers too, like psychokinesis and telepathy. All you need to do is buy this book for $49.99. Best value though. Even though he's been debunked and proven wrong on separate occasions, including on television, which is just insane. Seriously, look that guy up, it's crazy. He's been debunked like 5 times.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Catarina de Medici. Catarina was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559, with marriage to King Henry II, and she was the mother of 4 future French kings. It wasn't exactly surprising news that her husband, Henry II, had a lifelong affair with a mistress, but on his deathbed, when he was begging to see his mistress, Catarina refused and left him to die a lonely and painful death. Do I entirely blame her? No, but it's also a pretty heartless move, you know what I mean? The daughter of the queen, Margaret, was said to be rebellious, but her mother wasn't just going to let her get away with it. The mother and daughter would fight over the married daughter's extramarital affairs, and it is said that Catarina's scream could be heard echoing throughout the palace. One fight between the two even saw her locking her daughter up in a castle, never to see her again. In our number 4 spot today, we have Egropina the Younger. Roman Empress Julia Egropina of Rome was pretty spoiled. She lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor and she had a family, but that just wasn't enough for her and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she tricked her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing the Roman law so that they could get married. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died. Could be a really convenient coincidence, or it could have been a totally planned hit. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just telling you what the word on the street is. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had to force her out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow him, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. In our number 3 spot today, we have Maria Eleonora. Maria of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden, has quite a horrifying story that relates to the birth of her daughter. Apparently, Maria wasn't feeling the overwhelming joy of childbirth because although she was hoping for a son, she gave birth to a daughter, Queen Christina. Maria wasn't shy about her opinion. She apparently screamed that she was given a dark and ugly daughter with black eyes. Okay, it's kind of rude. She referred to her new child as a monster and apparently just absolutely did not want anything to do with Christina and would have rathered that she just didn't exist. Apparently, she even placed Christina to sleep next to the corpse of her father who had passed away. It's like a different kind of messed up. Things clearly weren't right with Maria. In our number 2 spot today, we have Queen Isabella. Isabella co-ruled Spain from 1451 to 1504 with King Ferdinand II, and during her reign, she had some pretty horrific views and feelings. She wanted to get rid of all Spanish Muslims and Jewish people from her kingdom. Sounds a bit like another evil ruler from history. In 1492, she ordered that all Jewish people either convert to Catholicism or get thrown out of the kingdom. She made them all come to Spanish court to either pledge their faith to Catholicism or get exiled from Spain. How horrible is that? The queen has also been attributed with establishing the Spanish Inquisition, which definitely is not a historical highlight. Both Isabella and Ferdinand are often said to have done great things for Spain, which in some cases is true, but at what cost cost and for what reason? In our number 1 spot today we have Rana Valona I, the last queen of Madagascar. She ruled the kingdom for 33 years from 1828 until 1861. There is no doubt that she was committed to her kingdom and that she would do anything for it, but in this plight she was cruel and violent. She initially came to power after the death of her husband, and once she had it, she was not letting it go. The queen was able to keep away the advances of the French and British, and she left the bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. In 1845, the queen ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months. They were meant to have this massive buffalo hunt. Well, she clearly wasn't thinking everything through, because 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and not one buffalo was hunted. Some records of history state that she even had her own uncle executed in order to protect her power, and there is an even more gruesome story. Some people even state that she ended her own mother's life by starving her to death. That is some epic level of evil, if it's true.
Let's start with the more familiar names and faces, such as the Julio-Claudian dynasty, a lineage that includes the first 5 emperors of Rome. The first being Emperor Augustus Caesar, aka Octavian, who founded the Roman Principate. He's also the one who beefed with his adopted dad's biological heir Mark Antony for said kingdom, and it unloaded all that Cleopatra, them taking their lives, snakes and swords drama. Tiberius comes next though, and he was one of the greatest Roman generals, but he was largely absent from running the state, preferring to leave the heavy lifting to the powerful men around him while doing horrific things on the privacy of his island Capri. Then Caligula, whose dad was poisoned by Tiberius, was a famous nutcase emperor and considered by many to be mentally insane for allegedly declaring war on the god of the sea Poseidon, appointing his horse military positions, and other overtly bizarre behavior. Then, when Praetorian guards smoke Caligula and his family, they appoint Claudius, who was the first emperor born outside of Italy, who completed the Roman annexation of Britain. Lastly was Nero, who committed, well, a lot of crimes, and took his own life, and after the death of Nero, Rome fell into disarray, as he had borne no son and their lineage collapsed. If you watch our channel, you know their name is on everything. The Habsburg Dynasty was a family originally from Switzerland. These guys spread their legs to spread their dynasty, and they had multiple Holy Roman emperors. They were reigning in Austria for 6 centuries, and through marriages they were able to put the Habsburgs into power in the following kingdoms: Burgundy, Spain, Bohemia, and Hungary. And thanks to the habit of keeping it in the family, most of these guys were nuts. For example, Roman Emperor Leopold I loved to torture, and the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph was less interested in ruling than he was into turning himself into a wizard. Lest we forget the worst attempted peace treaty in history. After allying with their Austro-Hungarian Empire with Germany in World War I, the new Emperor Karl I secretly contacted France to secure a peace treaty, so his empire may not be divided after the war. This led the French Prime Minister to realize the Austro-Hungarians must be so weak that their armies would soon collapse, but rather than respond to Karl, he published his letter publicly, destroying the last traces of morale in the empire. The line of dynasty that ruled the Imperial Spain and its colonies in the New World came to an abrupt end when Carlos II turned out to be a genetic basket case as a result of his family's intimate mixing. But there's like 90 more family members I could go through, and I got other stuff to do, so we're on to the next. A country known for the power of its dynasties gives us the Hans. When you Google the 10 most powerful dynasties in history, 8 out of the 10 results are dynasties of China. It is the first truly powerful family in China after the Qin, whose massive wars of conquest and vast construction projects killed almost half the population. Peasant Liu Bang is the lead of an army that ended the empire and began the Hans in 202 BC. The Han Empire had the longest duration of any empire, 2100 years of imperial rule, even when interrupted by a coup and split into 2 halves. They really shaped the economy and the culture of China more than any other lineage. They created institutions and economic policies. Its economy was more efficient than most empires at the time. The Han major export was silk, and they imported horses and glassware and precious metals, dominating the Silk Road. This was also the dynasty that brought paper to the world. Like most great empires, it started slipping after a few years. In the last decades, 2 emperors named Emperor Huan and Emperor Ling lived decadent lives. Slaying and fighting between rivals for power were common all over the empire, and as a result, a series of coups and revolts, the Han Empire quickly broke down as a series of warlords fought each other for control. One, Kakao Cao, he had possession of the young Emperor Zan and tried to unify unify China, but ultimately failed. After Kakao died in 2020 CE, the Emperor Xian was forced to give up his position, officially ending the Han Dynasty. Another famous name is the Capetian family. The House of Capet, as it's called, ruled France from 987 to 1328 as the senior-most line of the Capetian dynasty. Hugh Capet, King of France, starts what's the longest-running father-to-son succession line in history to date. An impressive 13 generations, spanning 330 years. The family itself already one of the oldest and largest royal houses in the world, repping names like the Windsors and the Habsburgs in their family, and the two Capetian monarchs are still running Spain and Luxembourg to this day. In total, their family has 38 French kings, 12 kings of Navarre, and 11 kings of Naples, 10 kings of Spain, and 9 kings of Portugal. Seeing as these guys are still going, I can't really say, oh well, this is when the last one died, now can I? Just gotta wait them out. Kidding. Or am I? Next, we all know about the spread of the Khans, but what about the Mongol dynasty itself? Obviously founded by Genghis, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous empire of all history. This man raised his way across Asia, well into the Ottoman Empire and the Egyptian lands, but never quite making it to full-blown all areas of Europe. Khan's descendants inherited and expanded his empire. It lasted for hundreds of years and appeared they were the most powerful family in the world, as everyone feared the day they might show up at their door. The Mongols invaded in every direction and most armies couldn't stand up to them at the time. They managed to create the Pax Monochalica, which allowed for trade, technology, and ideas to travel and flourish across Eurasia. This lineage was more powerful than all other dynasties at the time, but also notoriously more accepting of ethnic and religious differences. Just so long as you submit and follow our pretty chill laws, you could exist in peace. The dynasty lasted for 479 years, starting with Genghis Khan in 1206 and ending with the collapse of the Chattanooga Khanate in 1687.
Number 5. Empress Agrippina. Continuing on from 48 AD, the next leading lady in charge of ancient Rome was Julia Agrippina. And right off the bat, she was already spoiled. Yeah, she lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor, of course she did. She had a family, but still, that somehow all wasn't enough for Empress Agrippina. And she wanted more. Julia was quite ambitious, and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors, of course, as one would. She believed that her and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she lied her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing Roman law just so they could get married. Yeah, love it. Gotta change the rules, I guess. We can do that? Okay. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, suddenly, just out of the blue, oh no, Claudius passed away. Crazy. Most people think Julia had something to do with it. That's likely the case. The Empress and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so she could, hold on to that little bit of power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mom talking over his shoulders. He's like, you know what? No, you go to your room. How does that sound? Nero then had her forced out of said power, and Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most. And so she rallied a group of supporters to try and, overthrow the power, but plans backfired and she was expelled instead. Yeah, I'm watching a lot of Survivor right now. In Survivor, we call that a blind side, Jeff. Here we go. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, Ptolemy, I had to.
Number 4. Diane de Poitiers. Diane de Poitiers was a French noblewoman. She held power and influence as King Henry II's royal mistress and advisor until his death. And at the tender age of 15, Diane was married to Louise de Breze, the much older and grandson to the King of France. They had 2 daughters, Francois and Louise. After his death, she took interest in another very powerful man, her childhood crush, friend, and the new king. Henry married to Katarina de Medici. Wait, like that, Catherine? Yeah. Oh yeah, talk about a bizarre love triangle of power. After he got clocked in the face and died in a jousting accident like I said before, Diane adopted the habit of wearing black and white for the rest of her life. Queen Catherine de Medici soon assumed control though, restricting her access to the royal chambers from Henry's deathbed and not even allowing her at the royal funeral. I mean, she's a married woman. Wives and their husbands' mistresses. Copying her style, stealing her man and her crown, she was exiled, comfortably. Like early rich retirement. Spoiled. What do you think?
Number 3. Princess Margaret. Princess Leia wasn't the only rebel, okay? Princess Margaret, I have to mention, she partied with rock stars during the 60s, okay? I'm not gonna leave her out of this list. The Queen's younger sister was known as the rebel princess. She was seen for years and years as this badass, I guess, in the media, whatever. She passed away in 2002, but even to this day, we're trying to piece together her love life. Yeah, Pablo Picasso actually wanted to marry the princess. How fun is that? Also, I didn't realize how recent Pablo Picasso died. That was alarming. That was a wake-up call. Guess my whole life's a lie. Sick. Hit that thumbs up button if you also agree that Pablo's more recent. Insane. Her wedding was the first to be aired on TV, okay? She was a big deal. The first televised royal wedding took place on May 6, 1960. Now, in 1968, word had spread that the princess had an affair with nightclub pianist Robin Douglas Home, who just a year and a half later sadly took his own life. And then come 1973, paparazzi got photos of her with a landscape gardener on her private island. Ooh la la. Big zoom on that one. One of the more unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated. Yeah, she had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. Yeah, how dare her decide what she wants to do with her body post-death.
Number 2. Cleopatra. Talk about spoiled. Cleopatra Philopator was queen of the Kingdom of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC and its last active ruler. From both Roman and Egyptian blood, Cleopatra accompanied her father, Ptolemy XII, into exile to Rome. But after a revolt in Egypt, his rival daughter Berenice claimed his throne. Ooh, siblings, am I right? What are you looking at? Berenice was killed in 55 BC when Ptolemy, her, and Cleopatra's brother returned to Egypt with a Roman military and took revenge. Yeah, more siblings. When dad died, the reign of Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII was born, and short-lived, because arch nemesis Julius Caesar and him kinda hated each other. And yet, another war. Cleopatra sided with her brother's foe this time. Yeah, lots of switching sides back and forth, huh? Not a lot of loyalty in these families. I don't know. Eventually she cheated on him with Mark Antony, resulting in yet another war. After Antony was defeated, it led her love to take his own life out of shame and guilt. When Cleopatra found out about this, she poisoned herself, following him into the afterlife. Yeah, that's loyalty. That's true love. The OG Romeo and Juliet. Also, Shakespeare does a wonderful show around the affairs and power of these two. Eternity was in our lips and in our eyes. Antony, Act 1, Scene 1. That's beautiful. Beautiful, lovely.
And number 1, Clara Ward. Back in the late 1800s, the name Clara Ward would stir up quite the conversation. She was famous, but you know, for all the wrong reasons, of course. All it took was her bumping into a European royal. That's it, the rest is history. Since birth though, Clara was born into money. She didn't even need a royal husband in the first place, okay? She was born into a wealthy industrialist family. But she would sometimes visit the family mills, you know, make it look good, shake some hands, get some photos. Hey, yeah, nice button, awesome, see you later. She's involved, you know, she's part of the team. But then she crossed paths with the Prince of Karaman, Qin. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back with him said wife. People were freaking out at this point. A royal married a common American girl? This is unheard of. She was the talk of every town. See, unlike Meghan Markle, Clara loved to show off her newfound wealth. Some loved her in her image, others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician, and after her divorce, she turned to modeling. So yeah, it seems like she was in it for one reason. I don't know. I feel like she enjoyed the clout, just a little bit, right? Just a bit.
Starting our list is John Joel Glanton and his notorious gang. Like many Wild West figures on our list, he's got 2 pistols, a bounty on his head, and a long southern name. John was a soldier of fortune as much as an outlaw. Being an outlaw sent him running to Texas, where in 1835 he was living with his parents. It's during his time there that he marries, but it was a high tension time period with the indigenous people of the South, and he unfortunately lost his first wife in one of their raids. In 1849 he leaves behind his second wife, who's said to be the most beautiful woman in the Republic of Texas, to ride out of San Antonio for California with 30 well-armed gold seekers. He used his hatred of indigenous peoples to fuel his bounty hunting and again to collect and trade scalps and skulls for money. By 1850, however, it became increasingly difficult for the Glanton gang to find bounties for indigenous people specifically, his sick preference, and the group began to attack peaceful agricultural clans in the vicinity of Fort El Notre. He even started to attack innocent Mexican settlements in order to claim false bounties. His final escalation was when his gang seized a river ferry. While operating the ferry, they killed Mexican and American passengers alike for their money and goods. Ethnicity of the target no longer mattered to them, but thankfully they were stopped by the Yuma indigenous clan in the mid-1850s. What you reap is what you sow. These next escape artists were led by Judd Roberts. They robbed and killed an innocent rancher in 1885. Before that, Judd and his gang of 4 didn't really have much notoriety. They'd collected some bounties and they had some on their own heads. But they were never caught, always evading capture. Well, this time the Texas Rangers captured Roberts and one of his men. This was a time where hanging was the most sought after punishment, so Roberts and his cohort were put in the newest, most escape-proof jail in San Antonio. They may have only just become known names, but their ability to evade and escape authorities was always acknowledged. A short time later, a third member of the Roberts' gang is captured and placed in a lesser protected prison. With only one man still free, it's no surprise that local jail immediately and mysteriously burnt down, roasting the desperado inside alive. After 4 months, Roberts and his cohort escape from the San Antonio jail as predicted, reunite with their third, and Roberts was soon stealing horses in the Texas Panhandle once more. He periodically visited Williamson County to see relatives and friends, and Texas Ranger Ira Atten was dispatched to intercept him. After several clashes and near misses, the future Ranger John Hughes killed Roberts in the Panhandle. Eyes, knees, fingers, toes. Well, if we're counting, 3-Finger Jack had an obvious amount. Jokes aside, he didn't actually have 3 fingers. This is just one of those cool Western nicknames on the list. A notorious Arizona outlaw, he'd been captured and jailed back in 1895. I guess prison escape was super easy back then because he busted out and joined the Blackjack Christians. He's in this gang until he meets Bert Alvord and Billy Stiles. It's hard not to be nervous around them after all. They were sheriffs, but only by day. In some strange twist, these two, who you'll be learning about next, were outlaws by night. Alongside them were their posse of 4. During a train robbery in Fairbank, Texas, the train pulled into the station, and as the crowd was milling around, the outlaws mingled in the crowd pretending to be drunken cowboys. Sheriff Jeff Milton was standing in the open door of the baggage car when the outlaws opened fire, and he unfortunately was hit. While he was bleeding, the sheriff waited for the bystanders to clear, and he fired back. 3-Finger Jack was struck in the chest. As he died, Jack spilled the beans on his accomplices, which would be the ultimate snitch move, but also so that I can tell you the story of our next segment, which is all about Bert Alvord, the reverse Batman. Ah yes, a prestigious and respected sheriff. Bert came from the West with his father, who was a justice of the peace. As a teen, he worked in corrals and stables and even witnessed the famous shootout and, 3 years later, the execution of John Heath. Bert became a deputy to John Slaughter in 1886 and spent 4 years helping him track down thieves and rustlers. He became particularly adept at ferreting out information concerning the whereabouts of various fugitives, reportedly playing a drunk man like a fiddle. Alvord drifts into Mexico in the mid-1890s, rustling cattle, before becoming a law constable in Fairbank and then Wilcox, Arizona. It's here he becomes the Batman. Using his position and seeing the prosperity of criminals for so long, he masterminded a band of the best train robbers he'd ever met. Even after arrests in 1900 and 1903, Alvord and Billy Stiles, his deputy and accomplice, managed to escape a capture. When he collects a bounty too high to ever go unnoticed as a lawman again, shout out to 3-Finger Jack above, Alvord spreads a rumor of he and Billy's deaths, even sending 2 coffins to the town of Tombstone. The scheme naturally didn't work, the coffins were literally empty. So Alvord is recaptured in 1904, but after 2 years in prison at Yuma, he was released and went to Latin America. He reportedly turned up in Venezuela and in Panama as a canal worker. Supposedly he died around 1910. The worst alias in the West award goes to Big Steve. Why? Because his name was Steve Long. Like if he'd been tall and skinny, would they have called him Long Steve? No creativity, these Westerners. No debate though, Big Steve was big. He was a whopping 6'6" and rumored to be 3 feet wide in the shoulders alone. His background is very obscure to us, but this northerner established himself as a vicious gunman and La Marie. In 1867, he obtained the deputy marshal position and had a series of bloody gun duels within the first month. This grabs the attention of the Moyer brothers, who had founded the town and appointed themselves the justice of the peace and marshal respectively. 6 pistols, 1 in each hand, the trio dished out justice in the back room of the town saloon, ordering ranchers to sign over their deeds to their lands and miners to hand over their claims. Anyone who refused them was killed, and between that and the crooked card games, that saloon became known as the Bucket of Blood. Meanwhile, a local rancher was beginning to form a vigilante group to put the trio out of business. One night, after moonlighting as a thief, Long is injured by one of his intended victims. His fiancée is dressing the wound when Long confides in her how he got it. She's disgusted and tells the vigilante group about his attempted robbery. Don't trust no well anyways. The Bucket of Blood was stormed shortly after. On October 28, 1868, the vigilantes proceeded to hang the men, but not before Long made an unusual request to have his boots removed. Why? His last words were, "My mother always said said that I'd die with my shoes on.
Number 5, Nell Gwyn. Good old, pretty, witty Nell Gwyn. Perhaps one of, if not the most, famous actress to ever take up the stages of old. Women were not allowed to perform in theaters until King Charles II took up the throne after Cromwell banned theater altogether, because he was the worst, to bring back some spice to the world. Not only did he bring back theater, he brought women to the stage, because seeing them dressed up as men was kinda hot because they had wore tights. Anyways, enter Nell Gwyn, who would later become his mistress. She started out as an orange seller in his theaters, very often synonymous with being a lady of the night, but her natural wit and charm caught the eye of an actor named Charles Hart. She soon became his lover, but she soon joined the troupe as a comedic actress. She had a series of lovers before King Charles became enamored with her. Among his other love affairs, the guy was busy. She wasn't greedy, but Charles couldn't help but spoil her. She never received a title, but after calling their son a right in front of them, and she was like, what else am I supposed to call him? Their son became the Duke of St. Albans. The public adored her and was the only royal mistress in history to provoke public adoration. Once while she was in a coach, the public thought she was the Duchess of Portsmouth. Instead, she stuck her head out the window and said, "Pray good people be civil, I'm the Protestant." Good for you, Nell. She died sadly just past her 30s, likely due to the lead makeup she wore. She survived the king by just 2 years, and when he died he said, please take care of Nell Gwyn, because she's the cutest.
Number 4, Marilyn Monroe. We've all heard her name, but do we even know why? Who was Marilyn Monroe? Real name, Norma Jean. She was an actor in LA who over time became a sex symbol. She was in numerous blockbusters around the 50s, and to this day she's still an icon. Her fame, of course, meant unwanted attention at times. Most times. Like so many celebrities now, her private life was the center of attention, and it was quite a lot to deal with alone, I'm sure, let alone the entire world watching you and judging you. The rumors going around about her and John F. Kennedy and how she was having an affair, and then she divorced her third husband right after that happened, and then just at age 36, she was found next to a bottle of Nembutal pills, which were sleeping pills. Following a celebrity's life can be pretty harmful, especially when we hold them up to this standard because they're famous or they're good looking. It's toxic. If Marilyn Monroe was alive today and this all happened now, it would probably be even worse, because now we have bored people on TikTok. So she'd probably have a worse time.
Number 3, the Marquis de Sade. Ooh, we're getting spicy. This man was so wild that people are startled to learn that he was actually real. He is the founder of the term sadism, which should say a lot about him. And he was known for his scandalous and erotic texts that the public hungered for. Donatien Alphonse Francois Marquis de Sade lived from 1740 to 1814 and died in a mental asylum. His works were banned in France all the way up till 1957. Even his very name was scrubbed from the family legacy. Descendants, along with a very interested historian, found his work bricked up behind a wall in the attic of Condé Castle. The erotica he wrote is even too extreme by today's standards. He literally held nothing back. To people who admire him, his novels are about exploring the dark hidden impulses of human nature. Sade fought hard against the civilized restraints on behavior imposed on the state, while others interpret his work as a justification for all the awful crimes he committed. 120 Days in Sodom is his most famous work, which he wrote while imprisoned in the Bastille before being let out during the Revolution. Many look back upon him today as a philosopher who challenged control and ideas, all while still making any new reader blush.
Number 2, Anne Boleyn. This was considered one of the biggest scandals ever, this entire marriage. King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn were married. Anne was his second wife, and she was crowned queen in 1533, but only 3 years later, in 1536, she was charged with adultery, conspiracy against the king, and incest. Even worse, she was found guilty, and come May 19, 1536, she had her head taken off at Tower Green. Cut to today, was Anne Boleyn falsely accused? What do we know? Well, many believe that King Henry issued these charges in order to get Anne just out of the picture. She didn't produce a male heir, and right after she was executed, King Henry married his third wife, Jane Seymour, with the main goal in mind to have a son. Now, originally, Anne was a member of Henry's court. She was a maid of honor to Catherine, his first wife, and in typical kingly fashion, he tried to sleep around with her, but she wasn't into him initially. Now, when they did get married, it was quite the task. Divorce was a no-go under the Catholic Church, so Henry argued that Anne had previously married his brother Arthur. He argued that the Pope wrongfully granted that marriage, so he found a Pope loophole. Wild.
And of course at number 1 we have Giacomo Casanova. This man left behind his colorful life story wrapped within the pages of an erotic memoir. It was so scandalous that even a censored version was put on the Vatican's list of prohibited books. But in 2011 his scandalous pages were put on display, making the public blush. But it wasn't just his tales of sex and love that would shock you, but the sheer craziness of the life he lived. He lived from 1725 to 1798 and was the son of an actress. In film adaptations with David Tennant and Heath Ledger, he is depicted as an all-out playboy with unwavering charm. But he was also a true enlightened polymath. Voltaire, Catherine the Great, Benjamin Franklin, and Mozart all hung out with this dude. He was a gambler, an astrologer, a spy, a traveler, wrote a proto-feminist pamphlet, and a science fiction novel. He basically invented the lottery, saved a man who was being accidentally killed by his doctors, he fluctuated from penniless to extremely rich to penniless at the end of his life, and wrote his memoir while working as a librarian of all things. In and amongst his adventures were over 120 notorious love affairs with countesses, milkmaids, and even nuns. Sword fights, escapes, cons, arrests, the life of Casanova made for a very interesting read.
In our number 10 spot we have Irene of Athens. Starting off this list today we are heading back to the Byzantine Empire. Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yeah, that's how good old Mumsy came into power. In our number 9 spot today we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived from August of 1560 to August of 1614. She was born into one of the oldest and most powerful families in Transylvania, and she was well educated and ran various estates and bore many children. Oh, and this is all happening while she was also killing young women and bathing in their blood. Yeah, weird, gross, terrible. Elizabeth is known for killing her servants and bathing in their blood as she believed it would keep her young. Guess no one told her about moisturizing and minding your own business. All accounts of Elizabeth remember her as a terrible, evil person. It is said that her number of victims most likely ranges somewhere from 175 to 200, but some claim it might be as many as 600 people. It is no wonder she is referred to as Countess Dracula. In our number 8 spot today we have Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed, and during the time her son was just too young to rule. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she needed to see her wishes carried out before that happened. Her wishes included the capturing and killing of those who took the life of her husband, which was carried out using scalding hot water. Yeah, don't even want to imagine what that would have been like. Don't kill the king, I guess. Historically, it doesn't seem to work out well. Apparently in doing this, however, Olga developed a bit of a bloodthirst, and she would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. She is the ultimate ride or die. It seemed like if you even looked in the wrong direction or breathed in the vicinity of someone who had something to do with the king's slaying, you could kiss your own life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that the killers were from, she devised a plan to bury the tribe leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we do know is that she was not okay. In our number 7 spot today we have Wu Zetian. Throughout the long and storied history of China, there has only ever been one woman who held supreme power, and that is Empress Wu Zetian. Of course, considering this historic feat, she wanted to ensure that she kept her power by any means necessary. She had all of her rivals killed, so anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The Empress ordered the execution of the previous Empress as well as members of her own family. She had multiple methods of taking these people out, and rumor has it that she even had her own grandmother and 2 of her grandchildren killed for going against her. It didn't matter who you were, if you threatened her power, you were done for. It is said that after a while the Empress decided to do a little less killy and a little more lovey. Yeah. Apparently she started spending more time with her lovers, using some aphrodisiacs. You know, we all are a little crazy when we're young, but as we get older, we all crave the simplicity and just someone to love. Right? Of course though. People don't forget, and they were sure to exact their revenge. The people fought back and ended up having all of her lovers killed, and the Empress herself was exiled. You know what they say about karma? She does not miss. In our number 6 spot today we have Mary I. Queen Mary I didn't get the nickname Bloody Mary from nowhere. Oh no, this name was certainly earned. Mary was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country, which as you can imagine was quite problematic when she ascended the throne of England in 1553. Although her reign only lasted 5 years, she made a mark on history in a multitude of ways. She was the first true Queen of England, and she was quite a vicious ruler. During her time as queen, Mary announced a war against Protestantism, which left many who belonged to the religion being charged with hearsay. Doesn't sound all that bad until you learn that at the time the usual sentence for hearsay was to be burned at the stake. Nice. Mary was responsible for the burning of over 300 Protestants during her time as queen, which unsurprisingly left her quite unpopular.
How about some recent history to remind you these people aren't solely of the past? The Westfield Watcher. Derek and Maria Broadus filed a lawsuit in the Union County, New Jersey, alleging that their home's former owners had failed to warn them about a local individual who calls him or herself the Watcher. Are they a neighborhood gossip rag? Maybe an old coot who can't mind their business. Maybe a neighbor who leaves passive-aggressive notes. Wrong, wrong, and wrong. In 2015, one of the strangest cases in modern history appeared when a letter was mailed to the new owners of a home. Dated June 4th, 2014. You can find the transcripts of these lawsuits online, and they do contain the letters, so I figured why not directly read some for you guys. Alright, so here's some fun lines from letter 1. The house has been subject of my family for decades. I have been put in charge of watching it and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, my father watched the house in the 1960s, it is now my time. The Watcher also asks the couple, do you need to fill the house with young blood, I requested? Remind me to ask for young blood as a new housewarming gift in case I don't know, I might need that. Second and third letters were also just as deranged. Listen to this. Have they found what's in the walls yet? In time they will. Who has the bedroom facing the street? I'll know as soon as you move in. It will help me know who is in which bedroom, then I can plan better. All of the windows and doors in 657 Boulevard allow me to watch you and track you as you move through the house. No information on who the Watcher might be or why they sent out the letters has come to light. Letters contain implication, however, that this person's lineage once owned and dwelled in this home. The entire Broadus family has vacated the house in fear of their safety, but who will buy it next? Believe it or not, his head is on display in Ripley's, Wisconsin, the vampire of Dusseldorf. Also known as Dusseldorf's monster, Peter Kürten killed at least 9 people in 1929, Dusseldorf, Germany. Alright, so firstly, what made him so difficult to catch was he kept changing MOs. Not to freak you guys out, but historically this works incredibly well for police evasion and is the reason we have so many uncaught, unconnected cases today. Sometimes he used scissors or a hammer or his bare hands. Eventually when he is caught, it's due to a postal mistake. See, Maria was nearly a strangulation victim of Kürten's on May 14, 1930. She didn't report the police, but she wrote about it in a letter to a friend, and the letter she addressed incorrectly. Because of the incorrect address, a clerk at the post office opened it, read it, went what the hell, and forwarded it to the police, who then found and interviewed Maria and said, yo girl, we got something we need to talk about. She said the reason Kürten had let her go is she told him she couldn't remember his address where he'd taken her before taking her to the woods. Yeah, no, she remembered it just fine, to the point she said, grab your coats boys, let's go for a little walk. Kürten was arrested and found guilty of 9 killings and 7 attempted. He was was executed by guillotine on July 2nd, 1931. Then weirdly, his head is dissected and mummified and now displayed at Ripley's, believe it or not, in Wisconsin. If you're kosher like me, you have to worry about what's in your food. But for those who ate at Carl Grossman's cart, they really had to wonder, what's in a hot dog? The last name Grossman really suited him because even before he rented his greasy slum house in the 1920s Berlin, Grossman was packing a rep sheet of some seriously wonky criminal charges. And apparently, despite that, no red flags went off when tenants heard endless screaming echoing from his apartment, or when his highly unusual amount of female visitors would literally never leave. Suspicions literally weren't even raised until more than 20 bodies were discovered in a nearby waterway. Then police declared they had a serious on the loose. Wow, shocking! Authorities were finally alerted the next time the screaming started in Grossman's rooms, and in August 1921, they burst in to find him standing over the bound body of a woman he had just killed, horror movie style. He was suspected of at least 23 other slayings, but took his own life on July 5th, 1922 before he could be executed. Grossman was given the title the Butcher of Berlin as a result of bizarre rumors surrounding his crime. See, our boy Grossman spent a lot of time in Berlin's Sicilian train station, which is where he picked up many of the women he would take back to his apartment to victimize, women whose bodies were never found. He also sold hot dogs to hungry travelers at the very same station, with a copious supply of them to boot, despite the food and especially meat shortages in Berlin at the time. So ladies and gentlemen, what is in a hot dog? There had to be a cult somewhere in here, right? Well, this one operated on the ideology that I'm sure they'll be back, right? But not everyone is like Jesus, trooping on out of his grave a couple days after ending up in it. Margareta Peter, though, thought if anyone was, it was damn well her. Fiercely religious, she spent some of her 20s wandering Switzerland to preach the word of God, and by 29 she had settled back in her small hometown with a loyal congregation, many of which were immediate family. Woo, we love a supportive family. In fact, they were so supportive that when Margareta in 1823 became convinced that the devil was living in the rafters, they all went, yeah, that must be true. They had the same reaction to her declaration of being the Messiah, and then to her saying she's gonna start a battle against Satan. So naturally her whole congregation starts smashing up the house with farm tools before Margareta suddenly announces to turn the tools on each other. So while a Kingsman-style battle is going down, Margareta ups the ante, saying she needs to be sacrificed Jesus-style, but her sister jumps up, Katniss Everdeen-like, and volunteers. So the collective congregation, including the whole family, swarm and kill her. Followers rip up floorboards, make a makeshift cross that they, well, then crucified Margs, y'all. The real deal. They lifted the cross up, Margs hollered she's gonna come back in 3 days, and told him to bash her head in, which they did. Then everyone just kind of waited around. 3 days go by, neither sister rise, and folks are starting to scratch their heads and look around a little, and finally somebody gets the police on this. They pull up, everyone goes in the paddy wagon, and off to jail. And now for the kiss goodnight. Lonely heart killers. They lure victims in via personal ads in the newspapers, which is an archaic ass sentence to say, but hey, one less way to die nowadays with newspapers going out of style. But Tinder did replace it, I guess. Bella Kiss spent some of the early years of the 1900s corresponding with women he connected with through ads in the newspaper. Yes, they had personal ads back then, but whatever. The women never seemed to stick around for long though. In 1914, Kiss was conscripted and went off to fight in the First World War, leaving behind his home, shed, a lovely little garden, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a collection of large metal drums on the property which he told neighbors contained gasoline. During the summer of 1916, Kiss was still away and some soldiers had approached the constable of Quincota, which is where Kiss lived, inquiring about emergency fuel. Well, the constable remembers his homeboy Kiss has these big ass barrels and he could definitely spare some for his fellow soldiers. However, when one of the drums was open, there was no gasoline found in it. Instead, there was a human body. And in the next drum. And in the next drum. By the time they do a full search of Kiss's property, 24 bodies had been found, and Kiss, however, never was. Attempts to locate him were fruitless. The closest authorities ever came was in October of 1916, when a letter led them to a Serbian hospital in which Kiss had been allegedly recuperating from a battlefield injury. They scrambled themselves over there like the Scooby-Doo gang, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone, having placed the body of a dead soldier in his bed instead, and we still don't know where he went. Alrighty, I hope this inspired some creeps and shivery spines. If so, mission achieved.
Number 10. Irene of Athens. First off, it's safe to say that all these people were a little spoiled. Like the royal family times 1,000. When you're named after cities, you were like rich. Irene of Athens was Byzantine's empress to Emperor Leo IV and co-ruler from 792 until 797, mother to son Constantine VI, and sole ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire. Yeah, that's quite a resume, Irene. The quote, untimely death, okay, of her husband caused the throne to fall to her. Interesting. Although when Irene's son Constantine was a teen, several revolts tried to make him sole ruler. Mom caught on in 797, and Irene gouged out both of her son's eyes and imprisoned him, dying shortly after. Talk about grounded, dude. Mom's in that unconditional love, huh? A revolt years later overthrew Irene and exiled her to a remote island where Irene died months later. History's dark, huh? She's like, I'm gonna count to 3, and then I'm gonna rip out your eyes. 1, 2...
Number 9, Valeria Messalina. Turning the clocks back to 17, you know, the year 17, just 17 AD, a classic. That in 2016, solid years. Metaphorically and literally, ancient Romans paved the way for following civilizations. They achieved some groundbreaking stuff in their time, but the Empress of the Romans at that time, from 17 AD to 48 AD, Valeria Messalina, well, she was too focused on a more lavish business rather than ruling over armies at that time. Many accounts in history can confirm this. Pliny the Elder wrote about it as well, so you know it's the real deal. Valeria, she owned a big, fancy house where ladies of the evening would come and go. She made a lot of money. This is where the finest ladies who weren't even involved in that kind of lifestyle or that kind of business, this is where they changed their minds. Know what I mean? It was a big deal. She was changing the game. Because of Valeria and the operation she was running, sometimes Valeria herself would participate in these games. Yeah, contests, if I may, to see who could tango with the most people in one night. Yeah, Valeria hit 25 in one night, so yeah, I'd say she ruined a few parties, for sure. I mean, her husband, Emperor Claudius, would at least agree, no?
Number 8, Catarina de Medici. Catherine de Medici was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559 with marriage to King Henry II, and mother of 4 future French kings, Francis II, Charles IX, Henry III. The years during which all her sons reigned have been called the Age of Catherine de Medici, as she has extensive influence in politics in France at the time. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, she raised those boys. She was like the secret hand making all the decisions, but she was cool and subtle. She's basically the Kris Jenner of her time. She married Henry, second son of King Francis, and after the king took part in some friendly jousting, he was smashed in the face and the splinters took his life days later. Ouch. Catherine then and her frail 15-year-old son were king and queen. When he died, she took power again till her 10-year-old son was ready. After that, he died, same thing for the third son. The age expectancy was abysmal back then. She ruled with her youngest until her illness in her late 40s.
Number 7, Queen Ranavalona I, the last queen of Madagascar. Where to begin? Queen Ranavalona, one of the worst in history. She was born in 1788 and she ruled over the kingdom for 33 years. She was cruel, violent, and would often choose violence first in order to preserve independence over the island. She's known as the most ruthless queen in history. After the death of her husband, she just went mad with power. It's pretty sad. In the late 1700s, the king brought peace to the land, but of course there were traditionalists who opposed him, as everywhere that happens. And the king's uncle at one point tried to take him out, but a local warned the king. Okay. The king repaid said local by adopting his daughter being Ranavalona. And now she was set to marry his son, Prince Radama. Now when her prince was alive, they didn't get along, and then come 1810, the king passed away, giving Ranavalona the promotion of a lifetime. It's also theorized, of course, that she, you know, poisoned him, so that's probable and horrible. Ranavalona kept away the advances of the French and the British and left bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. Yeah, just to give you an idea of how she handled things. Yuck.
Number 6, Bloody Mary. England's first female monarch, Mary I, ruled for just 5 years. The only surviving child of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary took the throne after the brief reign of her half-brother. They say she was an evil queen, but after doing my homework, yeah, I'd have some chips on my shoulders as well. Married at 9 and 11? Everyone's just yelling at you because you're too young to have kids? Yeah, that's awful. She was promoted and demoted so many times, no wonder she did what she did. Every time she was close to the throne, all of a sudden her family tree was just like rearranged by law. Her dad decided to go down the other family route. Nice, nice. She's infamously remembered for burning 300 English Protestants at the stake, which earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. Her brother found a loophole with religion, so she was like, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, light him up. She's also famously remembered as teaming up with her half-sister Elizabeth I and ruling together as sisters, making them the first 2 British queens. She was spoiled from birth, but she's kind of a badass. Anyone that did her harm, past or present, they were either sent to the Tower or the chopping block. checkmate.
In our number 5 spot today we have Nero. For this one we are going to be taking it all the way back to the age of the Roman Empire. When we think back to these times, they weren't necessarily the most kind, peaceful times, but there certainly are some characters that stand out as being particularly brutal, and one of those is Nero. Throughout his reign, he wreaked havoc on the Roman Empire, he burned cities, he killed thousands of people, including every member of his own family, and I mean, we know the inventive execution methods of the past, so you can probably guess at just how brutal all of these were. Most Roman sources give us an almost completely negative review of him in reference to both his personality as well as his reign as a leader. He was called compulsive and corrupt, and it is believed that he is actually to blame for the great fire that burned Rome, but instead he used the Christians as a scapegoat so that they would receive punishments rather than him. In the end, after being declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate and realizing that the rebellion would be lost, he ended up taking his own life at the age of 30. In our number 4 spot today we have Pol Pot. Pol Pot was the leader of the Cambodian revolutionary group called the Khmer Rouge, and this group, with him at the forefront, went on to try and destroy the Cambodian civilization. This wasn't necessarily how the group started out, but once Paul and others who shared his ideals came to lead it, things quickly became very dark. He is likely one of the only people who ordered a mass genocide in his own country. The reasoning behind all of this is because he believed that destroying the civilization was the best way to start a new regime and bring in a new age. He ended up serving as the prime minister from 1976 until 1979, during which his policies led to the deaths of around 2 million people, which is horrifying. That was about 25% of the entire population. He even liked to keep the skulls of those he had killed. Just gonna say, it seems as though politics was the mask for someone who just really wanted to kill people. There are so many horrific details surrounding him and the things he did, much of which I can't even repeat here on YouTube, and that is exactly how he landed a spot here on today's list. He truly did some horrendous things, and in the end went on to live the rest of his life and died of natural causes before he could even answer for any of his crimes, which is just the most frustrating end to a horrible tale. In our number 3 spot today we have Maximilien Robespierre. Okay, I'll be honest. This is quite a polarizing one. Maximilian, on one hand, was great. He advocated for universal suffrage, for unrestricted admission to national posts, and he was against racial and religious discrimination. Especially in the time he ruled in, this was huge. Of course people were against him, but in our modern views, he was way ahead of his time in these beliefs. On the other hand, however, he was extremely violent and was the leader during most of the French reign of terror that happened during the Revolution. It is said that during this time he was responsible for imprisoning somewhere around 300,000 and killing somewhere around 40,000. During the Revolution in 1793, he was elected head of the Committee of Public Safety, and from that point on, any voice that was in opposition to the change that was happening was struck down and silenced by him. Throughout the years, his ego and power only grew, which led to him being a little too quick to use the guillotine, his favorite execution method. He was getting a little too cozy with that thing, so much so that he began to use it even on people who had, at one time, been his allies. We saw this clearly when it came to the execution of George Danton, who Maximilian had executed after he suggested maybe chilling out on the whole reign of terror thing. In the end, people caught on to this tendency for violence and horrible punishments, which definitely lost some of his public support, and this was only exacerbated when it was realized that he now had beliefs that directly contradicted those he had earlier, like when he tried to create a national religion called the Cult of the Supreme Being. By the time 1794 came around, he was overthrown, and later that year he found himself being executed by, you guessed it, the guillotine. Not good. No thanks. In our number 2 spot today we have Vlad Tepes. Often referred to as Vlad the Impaler, he was the ruler of Wallachia 3 times between 1448 until his death in 1476. He is often regarded as one of the most important rulers in Wallachian history, and to many he is a hero, and this is not to disregard that. But you don't get a nickname like the Impaler by being a passive, peaceful guy. Vlad was known for his brutality and his love love of impaling people, but it is also said that everyone's favorite vampire Dracula was modeled after him. This is because it is rumored that Vlad liked to dip his bread in the blood of his enemies before eating it. I prefer a little olive oil and balsamic vinegar with mine, but hey, to each his own, I guess. Vlad is known for his intimidation tactics, which included having bodies of those he had killed lined up outside of the city so that any enemies approaching would know what fate they had coming. Like I mentioned before, many regard Vlad as a hero. I mean, it is abundantly clear that he fought as hard as he could to protect Romania and Bulgaria from the Ottomans, but that doesn't mean that the horrific things he did have been forgotten either. Vlad definitely left quite the legacy behind when he was killed in 1476. In our number 1 spot today, we have Joseph Stalin. Stalin was a Georgian revolutionary and Soviet political leader who governed the Soviet Union from 1922 until his death in 1953. Despite the fact that he started his time governing the country as a part of a collective leadership, by the 1930s he had consolidated all of the power and went on to begin acting as the Soviet Union's dictator. During his reign, Stalin was responsible for the deaths of over 60 million people, 20 million of them being his own. Apparently the math works out to about 40,000 people per week, which is just unbelievable. For almost 30 years he reigned the Soviet Union with terror and violence. I mean, his decisions led to a famine that killed millions of people. Also, the lives he took weren't just of his enemies. I mean, how could one person have 60 million enemies? He would take the lives of families of people he liked. He just took too many lives, was too paranoid, and while he was powerful and smart, he could also be an absolute monster. This is all perfectly summed up when he said, quote, "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is simply a statistic."